So welcome everyone to the .NET user group. This is gonna be the last one of 2025. Super exciting for that. But we have a couple announcements before we dive into what's new in .NET 10 with Kevin. So the first one is there is going to be the next .NET user group. Our meetup is not going to be on the first Tuesday of January. It's going to be on the 13th, so that's the second Tuesday. We're going to be doing a merged event with the Python user group here in Spokane. Just be going over the retrospective on 2025, current software trends, and just in general what software development looks like for us as it's changing so rapidly. So keep an eye out for that event, but that's going to be the plan. The next announcement is on the 17th of this month. The Spokane Tech community is doing a year-end socials. It's going to be at No Lie Brew House. There is a QR code in the bottom, so it's just a chill event. Hang out, talk to everyone in the devs. The Python user group is the one leading it, but it's for everyone, and that's 5:30 to 7:30, Wednesday, December 17th. Another announcement is IntelliTech is actually hiring currently, so people online or people in person. If you're interested, please send a resume and a CV to that email. We're looking for people that want to ramp up quickly and are interested in learning, so it's a big one. In the .NET Conf in 2025, so it's going to happen in 2026, but it's tied to the 2025 event. It's going to be here in person. There's also an online portion, but for in-person with lunch provided, it's a registration fee. Go to that QR code on Eventbrite and you can sign up, and that's going to be January 13th, 12 to 5 p.m. We're going to have some really cool sessions from Kevin, Ben, myself, just talking about some of the awesome things that are new in .NET. The next one is GitCon. This one is December 10th to 11th. This is going to be a free online event, so go and sign up there. Someone might be in it, Kevin. But that's going to be it for the announcements. I've been super excited and really liked the process of doing the .NET user group, so if there's any feedback or any people want to give me comments, please, I'm always open. So without further ado, Kevin.
Is it on? Am I getting anything? Okay. We'll just start that one over real quick. For anybody online, the QR code and the link there will take you to a GitHub repo. You can see all of the code that we're going to show off tonight. For people who are hoping for a whole lot of AI-related stuff, I'm sorry to disappoint. This talk is going to be a little light on the AI-related topics and a little bit more focused on actually the down and dirty working with your hands. So we will dive right on in. So .NET Conf happens every year on November. I affectionately refer to it as Geek Christmas. This is Robert, my Christmas squirrel. He is lovely and wonderful, and he's always excited for Geek Christmas as well. If anybody is interested in .NET Conf stuff, all of the recordings from the sessions, because it happened last month, November 12th through 14th, give or take that range a little bit. We actually even have one of the .NET Conf speakers here in the room. If you want to go see Ben's talk, it is out there. On their main website, they have a YouTube with a breakdown of all of those. If you are wanting to dive deeper into some of the topics, there are a lot of 30 to 60-minute talks diving deep into those. Would highly recommend you go through and check those out as well. Isn't that right, Robert? Okay, so first update, and this is actually something that happened a little bit pre-.NET Conf. So ever since Microsoft came out with the .NET Core, .NET Framework, and then finally the quote-unquote one .NET, we've had this idea of STS releases and LTS releases. So standard term support and long-term support. And really the only difference between the two being how long that they were supported. So the STS releases were supported for 18 months, and the LTS releases were supported for 3 years. Now, with the release of .NET 10, .NET 9 is now supported a little bit longer. So for those of you who are on .NET 9 and wanting a little bit more time, the STS releases have been increased to have their support to be out at 2 years. So huzzah, you have a little bit more time. It just gives that extra bit for people who want to be able to upgrade but have, I don't know, hundreds of repositories that they need to do so, and it's not as trivial. Okay, now actually into the C#.NET 10 stuff. So something that comes up every year when we get around to this is the subtle difference between your target framework and your language version. So the language version, in this case C#14, gives you access to the newer tooling and compiler level features, whereas the target framework is actually the version of .NET that you're deploying to, the runtime that you're going to get. Now, to get all of the benefits, you want to be on both, but it is technically possible to rev your language version up to 14 and still target an older .NET framework. This way you have the ability to say, okay, I want to opt in to have some of the cool new compiler features, but you know, for whatever reason, I need to support an older .NET framework. Maybe you're a library author or otherwise, and you need to be able to go back and support it. The other big thing that came is Visual Studio 2026. Now, this was a major update. We've had Visual Studio 2022 now for 5-ish years. I know the years don't make sense. Work with it. Visual Studio 2026 had preview builds like 4 months ago-ish, and then finally GA'd at .NET Conf. It is a huge leap forward in Visual Studio. One, it comes with all of the magical Copilot AI stuff. I said it was light on AI, not none, which is awesome. It does have some extra tricks built in that you won't get in Copilot and say VS Code or similar. But it is also what you need if you actually want to be running .NET 10. So even though the .NET 10 preview builds did run on VS 2022, it is not an officially supported scenario. So if you want to be on a supported situation, you do need to be on Visual Studio 2026 with .NET 10 in order to be able to take advantage of all of the language features. It's also significantly faster. There's lots of improvements around find and otherwise. Just to plug it a little bit, you'll probably hear more about Visual Studio 2026 at our local .NET Conf event or similar. So if you have not checked it out, do so. Okay, next one, performance improvements. There are a lot. Every year we get into the .NET 10 C# realm, and the number of things that get faster and quicker and use less memory just improves each version. .NET 10 is no exception. I literally just took the headlines from their What's New page. So Stephen Taub, he has a talk on the .NET Conf, so go check it out if you want to see more. He goes through just some of the performance improvements. The problem is he writes what he calls a blog every year on the performance improvements, and the problem is he has no idea how long a blog is supposed to be. So this year, my printer estimates at about 242, 243 pages, which I did check counts as a novel. So he has no concept of what a blog is, but if you want an absolute deep dive of just a wealth of information of all of the improvements and how they work, absolutely go ahead and check it out. You'll note there's one of those items that's a little different than the others, right? Some of these make sense. GC write barriers, reflection, code layout, inline, all this stuff that we're used to, and then we have peanut butter, right? And so aside from making the squirrels happy because peanut butter is wonderful, it's an area that they put at the bottom where it's, here's all of the crunchy or rough edges that we've now smoothed over. So rather than going from that area, we now have some nice, simple, smoothed out areas that just make life a little bit better. These are the types of things that you actually really enjoy when you upgrade because things just run better, smoother, faster, less memory. But there are tons of things, absolutely go and dive into it because there is not enough time to even go through the page heading titles of all of them.
Kevin?
Yeah?
What is one of the examples of peanut butter here?
So one of the ones that they had in there came down to, I want to say, the rough edges around when they were capturing variables. So one of the things Stephen Taub covers in the talk that he does on .NET Conf is around how they do what's called escape detection. So if you have a variable that they know is going to only live for the life of the method, they can avoid allocating memory on the heap and instead put things onto the stack. So you end up with something that tends to go from some number of memory allocations to 0 memory allocations. And in .NET, we don't have performance problems. We have memory problems, and memory problems, which every time you see them talk about reducing allocations, the whole idea is if you can reduce how much work the garbage collector has to come behind and clean up, you end up getting a lot fewer GC runs, which means your program just runs faster, which is typically one of the big complaints for C# is, oh, you're a garbage collected environment. That means you guys have to pause and clean up your mess, whereas either the reference counted or the manual memory management folks, they go, well, we can control exactly when ours goes. And that's true, and there is some truth to that. But with each release, we just get a little bit faster and a little bit closer to where that difference and the GC cost is getting smaller and smaller and smaller each release.
Thank you.
Okay, and now code, because that sounds fun. Okay, so I've got a small little C# program here, nothing overly fancy. We can look at the CS proj. You will note we are just sitting here on a .NET 10, and this is literally .NET new console app is all we started from with the latest. Inside of our program CS, all we are doing is we are just grabbing a collection of squirrels, which obviously a group of squirrels is called a scurry. I think everyone knew that. And then we rip through and point out their names. Right, so we can launch it. Proof is in the pudding. Of course, it launches on the wrong screen at the wrong resolution, but that's okay. And we obviously have all of the famous squirrels that everyone's aware of. The GitHub Ship It squirrel, Scrat, Rocky, Conker, Pokemon name that I'm not going to mispronounce, and then obviously Robert makes the list because he is, of course, a famous squirrel as well now. So first thing that we end up getting inside of all of this is you'll note that we have this list here. And before string, let's see, name of list, before when we would do name of, we would have to do list of, I don't know, squirrel. And if you spell name of properly, not name oof, it goes through and works. And the problem is this name of just outputs the string list. Even though it is a generic type, it's only getting you that class name. So now we actually have name of on unbounded generics. Roaring applause here. Okay. Don't worry, that's just the. It still just gives list. It's just you don't have to type in the thing inside of the little kissing alligator angle brackets, right? Okay, so huzzah, simple, easy. Okay, now let's imagine that we want to go through and pull Robert out from this list of squirrels, right? So if we go here, from our scurry, we're gonna skip some number of squirrels, first or default, and we'd end up with needing to null check because first or default, if it doesn't find anything, gives us back a null. Great, fine. But now that we want to assign the name to Robert because he decided he wanted his full initials in there, not just his first name, which is fine. People might confuse him with other famous Roberts. We end up with this extra null check here. Now previously we've had the Elvis operator or the null propagation operator dot question mark where we could effectively daisy chain null checks all the way across. But those always occurred on the right-hand side of the equals, on the right-hand side of our assignment. Now, inside of C#14, we now have null propagation on the other side as well. Again, roaring applause. So no longer needing to actually go through and do the extra if checks. We can now just do question mark dot. If it is null, it won't actually end up doing the assignment on the right-hand side. Okay, simple, makes sense. And these are just the easy ones. This is quality of life, we'll call it. Okay, let's take a look at what a squirrel is. Yes, question.
Any gotchas with that?
Any gotchas with this? I think the biggest one is understanding the short circuiting of if Robert is null, what happens on the right-hand side of the equals, right? Of if the right-hand side was, say, a function with side effects, would that function get invoked or not? Answer no. The null short circuits everything going forward to the right, which is kind of in line with what you would expect with the null propagation on the other side. Is it everything to the right dies functionally? So you end up in the same case here. So now you shouldn't be setting that up with something with side effects, but there's certainly cases where that could occur, right? Whether intentional or otherwise. Great question. And people online, Dana's watching for questions as well. Please stop me if you've got questions. Happy to pause and answer them. Okay. So we take a look at our squirrel here, and you'll note that squirrel has a name property here that is declared non-nullable. And more importantly, the name property is read-write. I have both a get and a set. And this has historically been a problem since we got nullable reference types. Is if we wanted something that was mutable, we needed to actually check the incoming value on our setter, which meant we had to throw away all the benefits that we got from being an auto property because we wanted to implement a setter and we needed access to that backing field. Right? We wanted to be able to control that. With C#14 now, we have access to this new contextual keyword here called field. Because auto properties, by nature, the compiler generates the backing field behind them, which is great. That's what we want. We want the benefits of saying, magical property, you are there, build me a field. But occasionally, we want to add a little bit to it. We don't care what that field is called or where it's at, but we do want to access it, like in this case, to be able to null check it. So now that we have access to that contextual keyword, we can actually then say, OK, let me go ahead and just get rid and go back to an auto property on the getter, because the getter doesn't need to do anything fancy. It just return the backing field. Do your default behavior auto property. And then on the setter, I'm going to say, well, give me access to this field here. Now, this is technically a breaking change, because shockingly, people could have fields in classes named field, right? Specifically, things around databases are often the example that get brought up because databases have fields. It's not uncommon to have, say, a row in a database object have a field. See how confusing that is. So if you do end up with that, you will end up needing to either disambiguate with, say, a this dot to indicate, no, this is actually one of my fields, not the contextual keyword field, or escaping with something similar to the @ symbol that we've already had to say escape the keyword. This is going to be an identifier as well. All right, so if you do find yourself in that situation where there is a conflict, be aware that that is very useful. Now, the other thing we can do is we can actually go down onto this read-only list of cousins, because Robert's cousin is the GitHub shipit squirrel, obviously. If we go down here and change this guy to a field, we can actually go one step further and say, well, if I want to do something that's very lazy-like, where the getter actually will look at the field, if it's null, assign an empty collection, I can now take this all the way down and expression body the cousins collection all the way down to a single lambda that uses the auto-generated backing field of the property. If it's null, assign a new collection. On the next invocation, field is not null, so just go ahead and return it. So I can very easily implement this whole lazily executed property with 3 characters now without needing to do a whole lot of work and one magical new keyword. So that is the new field keyword. For people who do a lot of thick client development, WPF, Avalonia, Uno, etc., this should be very exciting to you because of our data-bound properties. We haven't had to think about it as much because we've gotten source generators and people have done a lot of work for us to not have to deal with those backing fields. But this now gives us one more step for having that intermediate path when we go, well, the auto-generated stuff isn't quite what I want. I don't want to rewrite all of it. I only need parts of it. So this gives us a very nice step through. Just be aware that if you have a field name field, that's bad. For those who care, this is also why IntelliTech typically recommends putting an underscore in front of your field names, just so you don't ever run into these types of problems. Right? It's not common, but it happens. It happens. But wait, there's more. Okay, now we get to the real fun here. So for many years, .NET has kind of teased us with this idea of extension everything, as the feature has been called. We've had extension methods since .NET 3.5 or 3.0, I can't remember, whenever Link was added in. See previous user group talk where I actually tell you the right answer. But extension methods have always just been static methods that appear like instance members on a type. They're great because you can attach some functionality to a type that you don't own, but that's all that you got with them. Admittedly very powerful, but it didn't actually get us all the way there. So, for example, we pulled Robert out of this scurry here, but it would be much better if we had an easier way of getting him out. So if we do, let's take a look at our squirrel extensions here. So I've got this extension method here, and this is very much old school style extension methods, right? It's inside of a static class. It's got a this in front of the first parameter. So then on my IEnumerable back on program CS, rather than doing this skip take, I can just do something like get Robert, right? Pulls it back, works, everyone's happy. The problem is this is something that I would probably like to improve. So let's go back here, and you'll note we get our fancy little tooltip here, and we now have an option to go to a new extension method, though the name is being cut off there. And you'll see we now get this extension block. And there's been a handful of times inside of C#'s history where a feature comes on where it's abandon how you used to write things, the new way is the future, and awesome. This is one of those features. There is very little reason to need to write extension methods in the old style unless you're needing to match a pattern or similar. These new extension blocks have all of the same power of the old extension methods and more. So the key thing here is you have an extension block, and then you have the type here that the extension is going to apply to. So in this case, an IEnumerable. And you'll note rather than a this parameter, I actually declare what that parameter is going to be up here. So now I can go ahead and do a get Robert down here, and you'll note I can automatically reference this extensioned member down inside of my method. And I can add more methods down here as well to be able to go through and, if I want more extensions on IEnumerable of squirrels, or squirrel, right? But wait, there's more. See, now we get the laughter. This is, Austin, I missed you. Okay, so what if we said beyond just methods, because having instance methods is fine, what if we actually went through and said, wouldn't it be cool if we actually had properties as well? So rather than just doing get Robert as a method, I can come over here and actually just say, you know what? On this, I just want to call Robert. And now I actually have an extension property as well. And you'll note it did it as a second block, but there's nothing stopping me from going through and combining these. There's also nothing stopping me from being able to go through and reference other extension members. And this is just compiler magic. Behind the scenes, there's nothing special here. It's just making the same kind of static method calls like you would expect. Same with our other extension methods. Dan?
Can you do an auto property here?
Can you do an auto property here?
Just add a new property to it?
So I assume, I don't know, count, right? You're thinking of some...
yeah, just a get and set.
Get, set. So no, and there's a reason, is this doesn't magically give you storage. And so the key thing here with an auto property is there's a field that's going there. And it's the same reason why you can't just add a field inside of one of these things, is it doesn't quite get you that storage mechanism. Yeah?
Are they all, I forget, did it change, are they all static still, just under the hood?
These...
Or is it actually now like each one gets its own instance, but are they all static?
Yeah, so the question was, are these all just static things still, or are these actual like instance things under the hood? Great question. So in the old extension method syntax, when you ran into naming conflicts, say you had two things that tried to bring in an extension method with the same signature, right, and you had to disambiguate where they came from, you would just invoke them like a static function. So if we go back here and I do squirrel extensions, you'll note there's a couple things here. So they are still just static methods on a static class. So these extension blocks still have to be inside of a static class, just like the old ones still had to be. You'll note for properties, you see this get underscore Robert, right? Because properties, you run into kind of this weird situation. Unlike methods where you've got parameters to be able to disambiguate overloads, you don't really get that with a property where the getter is parameterless. There's just a return of the type. So it actually exposes out the compiler-generated get underscore Robert. And for people who've looked at decompiled source, this should look familiar. Like when you do an auto property, This is what actually gets generated for your getters and setters. If you try to declare a method with this name in a class that has that property, you'll get a compiler error because it says, hang on, I've already got one of those. It's like, no, you don't. I didn't declare that method. Well, you kind of did. You just didn't realize it because you made it look like a property. So in the case where you have to disambiguate, you can still get at it the same way via the static class and a static reference. All right? Which is awesome.
But you can't do sets.
You can't do sets. You can't do auto property sets. You can do sets, but you have to store the data elsewhere, right? So if I were to do public int count, right? So I can do something of this nature where I then end up having to do, right, return 0, right? I can add this extra count thing on there, but at the end of the day, it's up to me to provide an implementation to put that data somewhere because I can't just go through and add it in. The other thing to remember is just like the old extension methods, you couldn't use this to really hijack an underlying type, right? In this case, if I am trying to put this on something that already has a count property, the extension method always has lower precedence than anything actually declared on the type. So the extension method always loses. So if somebody actually has a count property, you can't realistically use this to try to get them to invoke your type. All right, so all of the same rules with extension methods still apply. We just have access to even more members. As a side note, we aren't going to necessarily look at them here, but we also got partials for constructors and events, which most people probably won't care about unless you are a source generator author. Those are the people who are now getting enabled for more fancy things that they can do with partial events. So people may have to declare a partial event or a partial constructor that a source generator is going to then fill in for you. But know that those things are now allowed to be declared partial. But wouldn't it be cool if there was more? Now, you'll note here, when we got the scurry of squirrels, this was just a static on my squirrel class. But you'll note my squirrel class doesn't have a scurry method either, right? The get scurry actually is itself an extension. So in addition to extension everything, rather than just instance-like members, we can now do extension static members as well. Think of wanting to go ahead and do something like GUID. If you wanted to have your static function on GUID, do an incremental one, rather than just random new GUID. You now have a way of attaching that onto a type that you don't own. Now in this case, obviously, I was just going through and saying, you know what, this is a really convenient way for me to give a list of famous squirrels. But we can actually do static extensions as well. And the key difference here is rather than specifying the type up at the top or with a member name, we just do the type by itself, and now we have a static extension rather than a instance extension. Right? Questions? Good. But wait, what if we could keep going? If we've got access to static functions, there are other things that you can declare that are also statics. So let's go take a little look at that. So what do squirrels do? Obviously, they collect acorns. That is what we do. So if we go here, right, we've got this little horde class inside of here, and you'll note the horde class is just a place where we are going to count all of the acorns that we have collected because we need to know how many we've buried and are going to start sprouting new oak trees that we didn't intend for, hypothetically speaking. But you'll note here, I've got this little plus operator down here. So rather than just being able to go through and provide static extension methods, I can go through and I can actually provide operators on types that I don't own as well. So my operators can now be extensioned as well beyond just static methods on top of it. So this now opens up a whole new world of things where it's, okay, maybe I want to go through, and I think the example they used at .NET Comp is I have an enumerable of int, and I want to implement the multiplication operator because I want to, span this thing out as a vector or similar, right? Enumerable of int does not have a multiplication operator, but you can make it have one now.
So does that multiply two hordes to get a total count?
So in this case,
This is just adding to the property acorn count on a horde, right?
yeah, so this one here,
Takes a
this is just the plus, yeah, this is just the plus operator here. So it's taking the horde,
there it is.
adding 4 to it, and bringing it in. Because obviously the maximum number of acorns a squirrel can carry is 4. We've only got 4 hands, 4 feet, 4 limbs, right? Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess one in each of the front paws and 1 in each cheek, maybe? We'll go with that. That sounds better. That's better than, trying to do this maneuver, which I'm sure is how squirrels do it. I am convinced. And this is great, but we can actually do more, right? We can go one step further. What if we had compound operators? Because normally the plus operator, if you do nothing else, right? If we go back to this program CS, you'll see it's prompting me to say, hey, you know what? You're just doing this. You can go ahead and do plus equals 4, right? And typically what we would do is we would implement the plus operator, and the plus equals just handled calling the plus operator, doing the assignment, and handing it back to us. But there are some situations where if you know that it's a compound assignment, you can actually do it more efficiently than having to call out to the plus operator, especially in cases where your plus operator might be handing back a new instance. If there are cases where mutating actually ends up being a faster, more efficient use, you can actually go through and do that. So let's take a look at what that might be. So if we go here, don't spoil it, Copilot, you jerk. Actually, we're just gonna bring you outside. Oh, no, I can't because those are 2 different extension blocks. Boom. Right, so you'll note here, I can go ahead and get rid of that plus operator and just implement the plus equals operator. And you'll note this one now shows up slightly different than the regular operator because now it's kind of an instance member-y thing, right? Because a compound assignment implies that I have a thing to assign to. So I can now do effectively the same thing. And in this case, it's not really more efficient for me to do the plus equals operator, but it's slightly cooler. So we're doing it.
Why doesn't the compiler do that for you? Like, what stops it from seeing as using plus equals in that way? Like, I feel like, how is this not always better? Like, why isn't the decompiled code resulting in that?
So why isn't the decompiled? And that's why it prompts to do the plus equals, because it's not always possible. Sometimes your plus operator results in a new type, right? Like you could add 2 disparate things together and get a third thing that's different, right? You could think of like adding scalars to vectors and getting back a point or similar, right? Like those types of situations. So in those types of things, you wouldn't have a compound assignment. It really is just a plus operator that you're going through and building out. But now I can do, again, assuming that the compound operator can be done more efficiently, we now have the ability to declare compound operators ourselves as extensions if we want, or directly on types. That is a thing as well. But it's cooler to do as an extension, because we're showing extension everything.
Will you go back to the operator?
Yeah.
So, okay. Because in this case, you're not, the reason you're able to do basically the exact same code is because on the plus equals it's returning void, and the top one is returning the same type, right?
Correct, yeah. So the question being, the reason we're able to get away with effectively the same code in program CS is because this plus operator was taking in the horde and returning back the horde, right? So in this case, we can get away with it. But again, this plus operator doesn't always have to return the same type that you act on, right? You could add 2 disparate things together to get something different. I think vectors and points and scalar values are the obvious ones where things come through, where you add stuff together, right? I've seen people do things with rectangles where they add something that represents an area or similar, and it expands out. And rather than always having to return a new type, if you know that it's a compound assignment, rather than doing the plus, getting the new thing and handing it back, if you can more efficiently just update the individual one because you know that it's addition to the same instance, you can save yourself allocations.
So in the case where on line 5, if you return something else, like public static squirrel, that would, you could no longer then do a compound assignment. It wouldn't prompt you to do a compound assignment.
Right. So you're.
And then the same thing below, on line 17. If you return a horde on line 17.
So down here on 17, you can't have a compound assignment returning anything other than void, right? Because the whole idea is that you have to be acting on a singular instance, which is how things get more efficient, right? So if we end up doing this, right? So in this case, foo ends up being an int because of the addition operator now returning back an int. So it no longer prompts me to say, hey, let's go ahead and do this compound assignment. It just says, hey, you aren't using foo.
Got it, okay.
Right, so that gets us all the way through there. Great questions, though. Any more questions? So, again, the extension everything feature, I think, is arguably the biggest feature of C# 14, and it does change the way that I would recommend people write their C# code. This is, again, there's very little reason to go back to the other extension method syntax unless you are needing to match features, people aren't able to use the newer SDK, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if your whole team is running .NET 10, upgrade, leverage it. The new extension stuff is much nicer. And in case it's not obvious as well, I've done this now a couple times, you aren't limited by which extension blocks you put inside this class. Right? These can be whatever makes sense. That is an organizational unit available to you. Minor annoyance, and I'm hoping it's just because I am on the insiders build of Visual Studio 2026. Yeah, you'll note my collapsing. Yeah, I can't collapse an extension block, and that really bothers me. So I'm hoping that's just an IDE bug or something that gets fixed very soon, because I would really like to be able to collapse it like I can every other pair of curly braces in this language. But that's just me. Okay.
On another note, when does 2026 get out of insiders?
So the question being, when does VS 2026 get out of insiders? It already is. So last month in November. I am just consistently running insiders builds because I like the latest and greatest stuff. Okay. So with .NET Conf, they rebranded Visual Studio because it used to be VS Preview and GA Visual Studio, but they wanted naming parity between VS Code and Visual Studio. So now it's always Insiders and GA, okay, and so they just bring them together. So effectively, the Insiders ring is just you are getting releases first. So as they deploy out updates, the Insiders gets it a little quicker than everyone else, so you get to guinea pig out features, which is great. I like having the new stuff. It also means when things break, I am the first one to suffer. So you're welcome. I suffer on your behalf. Okay, cool. Let's jump back here real quick. So we're going to jump over, so from code now out into .NET SDK land of a handful of new things there. So .NET CLI, my fingers never did figure out the naming scheme of how they did their nested subcommands for .NET add package, .NET package add. They've now gone through and standardized them so that, and I guess I got these bullet points slightly out of order, but it is now .NET noun verb, if that's the easy way to go through and remember it. The old ones still exist. They're just now aliased so that everything is actually now consistent, which is great. So now once you learn it, if your fingers are already doing the muscle memory of the old ones, don't worry, the alias still works. The other big one is this interactive flag. Right? So CLI commands are now, when they are run in an interactive terminal, it is interactive by default, right? Whereas before that wasn't necessarily the case. This is probably not going to bite too many people. If you are running inside of GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps, your terminals are already not interactive. This is more for people who might be doing like a process start or similar and otherwise and expecting a non-interactive experience that accidentally get bit by it. If you do need to change it, there's a -- interactive. You can set it to false and you're off to the races. Now, the one that is more cool, .NET occasionally gets feature envy of other programming languages and frameworks. So NPM has had NPX for a while, which lets them go ahead and just say, hey, I want to run this tool, NPX insert tool thing go, right? Which is great. We didn't have that until now. So what we got is DNX, because we have to make sure people understand that we have a little bit of feature envy. So if you have a .NET global tool out on NuGet.org, you can now just DNX the tool name, which is all this .NET say is. This is a global tool that exists out there, and we'll see it run in a minute. It's effectively a fancy echo service. And then everything else up here gets passed just as command line arguments. And you'll note bare words work just fine here, right? So if we say .NET say, have yourself a merry little NuGet, right? Amazing, right? So if you do run the DNX command inside of a repository that has a local tools manifest, it will use that manifest to figure out which version of the tool to run. So just know that if you do it kind of arbitrarily like I've done out in the middle of some random directory, it's going to go out and it's pulling down to your global NuGet cache. It's not installing the tool. So if I were to do a .NET tools list looking for .NET say, it doesn't exist. It's not quite the same as .NET tool install global, but it still does have to download the tool so that it can be able to go through and execute it. So it gives us a quick and easy way to have tools out there. So if you have published a .NET tool out, then this gives us a nice quick and easy way to be able to execute something without necessarily needing to go through and install it, right? Which is great. So a little bit of feature envy, and we're off. Okay. Next, for anybody who's been very depressed that the code coverage feature in Visual Studio has been enterprise only, Visual Studio 2026 is going to be a wonderful thing for you. The code coverage feature is now in all versions of VS 2026. So Community, Pro, Enterprise, all of them now have access to the code coverage feature, which is awesome. So if you haven't used that before, it is a wonderful way to make sure that you are actually covering the code that you think that you are testing versus coverlet or otherwise that I think a lot of people have worked around with on the CLI because the built-in Visual Studio stuff wasn't available in the SKU they were running. Another big one is the Microsoft Testing Platform support for .NET Test. So Microsoft Testing Platform, or MTP, came out in the .NET 9 timeframe sometime. It kind of released out of band with everything else. But the .NET Test support was kind of a hack. So the Microsoft Testing Platform is Microsoft reimagining how test projects should be built and run. So XUnit and a handful of other ones that had this for a while, where your test projects would compile down to an arbitrary exe, where you could then just run the exe on your own, which was great. It made your tests an actual artifact that you could pass around and run, and if you wanted to spin up multiple processes and spread them around, it was much nicer. It's also much faster than running under the normal VS Test Runner, because the VS Test Runner has to spin processes, communicate back and forth. This is now run process, done, right? So there's a lot fewer layers and oftentimes a lot quicker. But with .NET Test, it was kind of this weird thing because .NET Test really wanted to start your VS Test Runner and didn't really have a good way of dealing with some of the MTP scenarios, and passing in args to it was really kind of hacky. So now with .NET 10, in your global.json, you can go through and explicitly say which test runner you want to use. So now when you run .NET Test, just like how all of the other .NET commands look at your global.json to know which version of .NET to run, if you go through and specify the runner as MTP, you will get the MTP runner, and you can just now go .NET Test like you used to be able to do inside your projects, and it will work. Right? Prior to this, we would often cheat and just say, you know, screw it. I'm going to do .NET Run on my test project and be done with it. So full support, and it now doesn't hurt nearly as much. As a quick side note for anybody interested, the MTP stuff, if you haven't noticed XUnit, and you're still on XUnit v2, there is an XUnit v3 that is full MTP. That is worthwhile upgrading to if you are on the XUnit platform. So worth checking out. Okay, a couple breaking changes to be aware of. System link async. So if you've been using iasync enumerable to do any async iterators, you have probably brought in the system link async package either directly or as a dependency somewhere else. A lot of things that we're doing, like asynchronous streams or similar, had it as a downstream dependency. That is now in the box. It is no longer a third-party one, which is great. However, it does mean you might run into fun naming conflicts. If you now have something that's in the BCL and someone bringing in the NuGet package, it now has matching type names and namespaces, and that doesn't work real well for people. So just be aware. In most cases, you can probably just torch the NuGet reference, assuming you're bringing it in directly. If it's a downstream dependency, that's going to depend. Message your package authors and support them because they need help. Next one, null values in iConfiguration. This is one that I don't know. I only briefly have ever seen people abuse this a couple of times. But before, if you had a null value come out of an iConfiguration provider, it would treat it as though that value didn't exist. And so effectively, there was no way to tell the difference between a null value and not provided value, which most of the time are probably the same. But if you've got like a JSON file provider, you can specify a null there, and maybe you actually want that null to propagate up for reasons, because null is meaningful in some use case for you. Null values do now propagate all the way up. So if you have a null hanging out in a JSON that just magically starts showing up, that's why the iConfiguration stuff is bringing it through. There is a full list of breaking changes. A lot of these things are fairly esoteric. There's a lot of breaking changes where APIs that were previously marked obsolete are now deleted. So if you were ignoring those obsolete warnings, now's the time to fix them because some of those are deleted. Okay, Entity Framework, the other one, because most people here on .NET are using EF for their database interactions. Azure SQL has had vector support for a little while, but this now brings in EF support for the vector distance function and the vector data type that was out there. So again, slide on the AI stuff. So people who were using Azure SQL for like their RAG scenarios to be able to store their embeddings, EF now fully supports this. The other one, and this actually bit us on one of our projects, the SQL JSON data type support. So SQL has had, and EF has had this support for the JSON data type for a while. What's different now is if you are running EF10 and you're configuring your DB context with use Azure SQL, which you were if you were using Aspire stuff, and you are at a compatibility level of 170 or higher, again, lots of things. It sounds weird, but this is a default case for a lot of us. This now defaults to the new JSON data type. So just be aware that is a thing that could be biting you if you were on hosted Azure SQL. Congratulations. Guess what compatibility level you are above. Another big one, for anyone who's tried to do a left or a right join in EF, right? This was always an obnoxious one because you had to do a group by and then a default if empty, and you had to craft your link in such a way that the output SQL was a left join. It was kind of annoying, and when you read the expression, it doesn't read like a left join, right? If you've got somebody who's come from a big SQL background who knows, ooh, this is what I type. I type left join other table, right, and bring it through. It's like, how do I do that in EF? It's like, right. So you do the group by, and then you do the default if empty, and then this will generate the magical SQL. There are now EF functions that will generate the left and right join operators for you, so you can now go through and just leverage them directly, and you get the expected left and right join operations, which is great. So if you've got a lot of those default if empty calls, those are the ones you probably want to hunt to find your hacks that you've put in place over the years. Another big one is named query filters. So EF has had query filters for a bit, with the idea being that quite often, say you've implemented a soft delete. You probably want to say, hey, give me back all of my objects where is deleted is false. Right? That's a thing I probably want to do. The problem being is that you only had one query filter per entity type. And so the moment you said, well, I've got this deleted flag here, but I've also got this filter where maybe I have the concept of like an archive as well. where there's slightly different connotations between whether something's been deleted or archived, there wasn't really a great way of dealing with this aside from doing it yourself. Now your query filters have names on them, and they can be either excluded individually or brought in depending on which way you've got it set up. Just know that if you are using the query filters APIs, there are some breaking changes that you might need to go and address there to put in some strings for the extra parameters that are now there. And then finally, migrations are no longer running in a single transaction. This was a change that came in EF9. Now they're like, oh, we'll just put all the migrations in a single transaction and roll them back if one of them fails. It turns out that was not a great idea. There were some migration scenarios where that ended up breaking things, and so that has now been reverted. So if you saw that behavior going from EF8 to EF9, the EF9 change has now gone back, and in EF10, we are now back to regular, each migration runs in its own transaction. So now if something fails, it's going to stop at that point, and you'll at least see that migration in your migrations table rather than going, huh, what happened? Okay. And there I am at the end of my stuff. Questions? Comments? Don't everybody jump at once. Yep.
I was trying to understand the SQL JSON case. What's the break that you encounter? You basically upgrade, right, to .NET 10, and new entity framework is like compiler. Is this what's actually? I'm not clear.
So the JSON data type has previously existed inside of SQL. The change here is how the data is persisted. So before, even though EF has had the JSON data type that you could then interact back and forth, think of it as a way to, I've got a complex object, I want to store it in a column, right? It would just JSON serialize, shove it in, but it was shoving it in as I want to say nvarchar max, don't quote me on that, right, of putting it in. SQL has the ability to store it as a binary format instead, which is faster, more efficient, and otherwise. So there is, it's not necessarily, I'm trying to remember if you get a compiler error with it or a runtime error. I didn't do the migration where we hit this. I think it's a runtime error if I remember correctly. Not necessarily a runtime error. It's a runtime error if you don't run .NET EF migrations add afterwards.
Would you get a context?
Yeah.
Say, oh, what's changed in your database?
I believe that's where we got bit, is if you run against it without regenning the migrations.
How do you have, so if you want to use nvarchar for some reason instead of this new binary, how do you specify that in EF?
Yeah, so you can still, if you want the EVF, you go back with, I want to say it's entity has complex property, and then inside of the complex property you do has conversion, and you just JSON serialize the thing back and forth with Newtonsoft or systemtext.json or whatever makes you happy. So you can still go, which is something you could have done prior to this. It's just the defaults have changed out from under you, which is always exciting when you don't change a line of code, but that code now does something different than it used to, which is very, very exciting. I will say for the projects that we've upgraded, most of them, you change the 9 to a 10 and you're off to the races. And there's not a lot of things going through
How does Aspire deal with the .NET changes?
Aspire runs great. And for more details on Aspire, .NET Conf next month. By yours truly. Yes. I absolutely love .NET Aspire. There are a handful of changes. Aspire is hard to add into a talk like this because Aspire, I'm fairly confident, has been doing a major release like every month or two. It's like they don't want me to be able to write a talk and have it be valuable a month later.
They want a higher number than everyone else.
Yeah, they are revving very quickly, moving very fast, and it's cool to see. But they also are releasing a lot of things as preview packages and otherwise. So if it's like, ooh, when are they going to support this? It's like, well, if you're willing to go to a preview package, you can have it today. But if you want a GA, you might have to wait a little bit. So.
The
Yeah.
JSON type, is it smart enough that you can just represent your JSON objects as a JSON element or whatever in C#, and then when it's doing the migration, it's going to go, okay, you want a data type of your column to actually be
So how does it know when it's the JSON? So there is a dot as JSON function that I'm trying to remember the APIs, because it's you grab the entity type, and on the complex property, I believe it's dot as JSON on the end of it, I think, to be able to go through and specify. In fact, I think I can go one step further.
Is it to JSON?
It could be to JSON. Don't. This is why you shouldn't quote me.
Off the rails here with EF stuff, but
No, you are fine. I did not. Oh, I didn't make my link clickable. That was bad on me. I should have made my link clickable.
AI says it's to JSON. But
Yeah, you know what? It's very possible. I'm going from memory, and it actually can query the internet. So we're going to go with the thing that can query the internet. It's probably more right than the guy who's trying to cram the internet into his head.
JSON.
Okay, fine, Copilot, you win. So, any other questions?
I'll just
Ben.
ask questions. With the extension method property,
Yep.
Where you can actually auto-prop to a method call and similar, what's that? I haven't actually looked at like Sharpline, but what's actually happening down the IL when it's doing something like that? Do you get a bunch of, not a bunch, but relatively a bunch of overhead doing basically 2 hops, or is it going to short circuit an inline all the way down to your base implementation there of a method? Like, what's actually, are you taking expense by using extension properties there?
Yeah, so the question being is there added overhead from the use of extension members here, especially with the double hop going from this enumerable here up into the function? So the answer is there's no additional overhead beyond what you would have gotten writing these methods yourself. So whether it inlines a property or otherwise into another call, it's the same logic. Under the hood, all that is happening is you are getting static members or static methods added to this Squirrel extensions class, right? So there are, if you pull the IL for this, you'll see static methods created, and the property will get created as that get underscore Robert as the static method, and that's what actually gets invoked from your program CS, right? So when I have here, this is identical to doing, let's see, Squirrel extensions get Robert, right? And I do this maneuver. Those are identical, right? So it's no more extra overhead than just directly invoking the static function. Again, the compiler gets all of its usual tricks and toys for lowering or inlining or whatever it's going to end up doing. Same with the runtime. If it decides that, oh, I can go faster if I just inline this, great. But it's just new syntax to be able to leverage static stuff again. Worst case is it's one extra method call, and it's a method call it was going to have to make anyway if you wrote them all as statics, right? So if you were to go and write these as static functions and invoke them, you'd get effectively the same behavior, right? The big advantage of the extension methods versus just doing them all as static is you end up being able to do things like that, where you can now start mixing and matching other C# features. Whereas with a static function, it's not so trivial to say, ooh, how am I going to null check this guy, right? Because now I have to do like an if and a ternary and all this other stuff, versus with the extension syntax, I can now start daisy chaining stuff together, right? But they still are just static calls at the end of the day when the compiler goes and converts your C# down into IL. Great question. Because IL is fun.
Last question for me.
Promise.
Daily usage, what do you think is the most useful feature that you experience here? Because there's a lot that are like cool and these kind of more nuanced, like I'm not going to go write plus equals for my object every day. But
Yeah. So the question being, what's day-to-day the most useful feature? This one right here.
left side, yeah, that is nice.
That.
is there
Because how many times do I do if thingy is not null, then do other thingy assignment? Like a lot. So that one is probably the biggest in the day-to-day.
Analyzer for that one?
Yeah, this one here actually, I think, let's see. That's pretty close. You're wrong. Let's see, Robert 2, right? So you'll see there, you've got the little analyzer of saying, hey, let's go ahead and use null propagation. Thank you. Cut it all the way down. So when in doubt, follow the magical little paintbrush, what used to be a light bulb icon, and do what it tells you, because that's often how Microsoft has been trying to hint to people about new features, because oftentimes the features are there, people just don't realize it, right? Like this thing here is, I mean, most people would end up previously writing this as toList, right? Because get scurry is an IEnumerable, but once again, like my brain sees these little dots, and like the OCD in me goes, dots, must get rid of dots. They're like the red squiggles in Word. You cannot have them, they must go away. And so it's like, ooh, collection expression, go ahead and do that for me, right? So you can always dial up those, because most of these are under the IDE prefix for what they will show up in like your output window or error one, which means they aren't warnings, they aren't things, but it's like, hey, you could actually either maybe gain a little performance or have something be a little bit more terse. And if you want to control them, put an editor config in your repo and dial them up or down appropriately as you see fit. Because you can say, ooh, you know what, we don't want people doing that anymore. We want everything collection expression. Make that a warning because, I don't know, I hate my engineers. Like, that is a thing you can do. Don't do that. People should adopt. But in general, I think most of the stuff is probably there. For the extension methods, I have not written a regular extension method since .NET 10 dropped because I have no reason to go back to the old syntax when the new one is better in every way. I have not found a case where I want to do it the old way. And so now I automatically convert everything over to the extension blocks. With the mild exception being the collapsibility inside the IDE. That part annoys me.
That's a Visual Studio thing.
That's a Visual Studio thing, not really a C#.NET thing. And that's just Kevin being annoyed because I like to collapse things and have them be smooth and simple. Which, I will say, is one slight argument. You can get around it with a region. Right? And like if you really want to collapse things, right? This works, right? There we go. So to work around the lack of a collapsible area, put in a region tag.
That was worth my money.
The comment was that was worth Austin's money. I'm sure I'll be collecting that later.
That's and main thing otherwise is less characters to type.
Yeah, less characters to type, the reuse of this variable, clearer, easier syntax, because once you do your extension block, everything else that you write on the inside is exactly like you would write it if you were inside of this, I don't want to say class because that's an interface, if you were inside of this thingy.
Can you give the extension block an access modifier, like an internal?
So can you give the extension block an access modifier? No, but you can give the class that it's added to
I didn't know because
a modifier.
a public static class, but then internal. These are the internal utilities.
Yeah. So the idea being, oh, I would really love to make this guy internal or otherwise, right? But no. If you do have a reason to break.
Can you change get Robert to internal?
Can I change this guy? Yeah. Right? Again, same as what I could have done before with the old extension method syntax. I could have had a public static class with an internal extension method on it. That is a thing you can go through and do. And there is, potentially the argument for, ooh, I want this guy to be private because, the only person who should be able to access this is this guy here, which, again, totally a thing you could do. But it's also something that you could have done with the old extension method syntax as well, right? A private extension method inside of a public static class, or in this case, an internal static class because it's lacking an access modifier. Great question. Austin.
Oh, I was checking. That's private in the context of now your extension block. You can continue, or your other extension methods could reference.
Yeah, only Robert can access that extension method.
Yeah.
Right. Though I will say, let's see.
Does it work in all extension contexts?
Well, so that's, I was going to say, I have a feeling this is where you're about to go with the question here. So I'm going to preempt you and just go here, right? Wow. Right, so even though these are in two separate extension blocks, just remember that both, yeah.
The extension block is actually doing it. Is that red squigglies?
I mean, it's red squigglies. It's red squigglies because it's unhappy that I haven't done this, right? So it's. So,
You caught him.
but you are correct, right? Like normally I've taught people C-sharp scoping of C-sharp scoping is the curly braces, right? If two things are inside the same set of curly braces, they can see each other. If they're inside neighboring curly braces, they don't see each other. Well, now we've got an added exception to that rule. But again, it comes from the idea that these extension blocks are really just syntactic sugar for how am I going to put together these static members on this class here, right? Like that is really what they are there, is they're kind of this building block thing, not actually a scoping thing. And this is part of why the extension everything feature took them multiple versions to launch, because they teased us with this last release. And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it. It got closer, they're like, yeah, we're not ready, we're not ready. And then they did, like, the .NET team, they will repeatedly tell you they do not commit to a feature until after they've shipped it, right? Like, that is when they're committed to it, not before. And so they are very happy to yank things if they find breaking changes or otherwise. And that's what took the longest period of time, is finding a syntax that worked, and ideally one that didn't cause major breaks with existing code, right? Because that is, there is this big issue that they've got, I shouldn't say issue, a problem that they always have to struggle with because C# has been around so long. There are massive code bases with lots of code out there that were written years ago, and people just keep revving the framework on it every time just to keep them in support. Next framework, which is great because you can write code most of the time in the old C# 2.0 syntax and still have it work inside of a .NET 10 framework. Right? You aren't leveraging any of the cool features, but unless you're hitting like an obsoleted API or something, you're probably pretty safe. In a lot of cases, you just rev that framework. And so they are very cautious about breaking changes. Right? I say that, and you can go and see the pages and pages of links of here's all the breaking changes. But you start reading through them, and there were only two that I felt were likely to run for anyone to run into. Right? And only one of them is in the BCL. The other one's in iConfiguration, and I don't know, like, there's, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 pages of links of all of their breaking changes that they have out there, but most of them are fairly esoteric, or they're things that have been obsolete that have been removed. Yeah?
If you go back to the extensions.
Yeah.
So, I don't remember what I was going to ask because I forgot it when I was.
It was a brilliant question.
No, it wasn't, but. I'll think of it in a second.
To be fair, I did answer, before it started, Dan did ask the question if he should know what a scurry was, and I told him, don't worry, he would know by the end of the talk. I will say, that was one of the weirdest things for this, is nobody should look at my Google search history and prep for this. There was a lot of squirrel-related research. There was also some .NET-related research as well, but a little bit more squirrel. One of them I knew better than the other. Still got nothing.
I didn't remember.
It was
it was something about the extension methods, but I cannot remember.
Yeah.
If you write the old version of an extension method, is there an analyzer to, hey, this is the new way we should be doing it?
Yeah. So, for example, this guy here, I think we actually had.
Oh, we did it, right?
Yeah, we did it right at the very beginning, where it was public, static, squirrel. This enumerable of squirrel, and I gotta disambiguate this because they're gonna collide if I don't. But yeah, there is on your existing ones, if you want to convert them over, there is a very convenient fixer built right in, because it is a fairly simple conversion straight in, right? You might get it generating multiple extension blocks depending on where these things are located, but they're fairly easy to shift around as needed.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Gonna jump back. Okay. Throw that back up for anybody who wants it. Again, that link will take you out to the repository. I'll push a branch with the completed state of things. There may already be one out there, but the slide deck is also inside that repo as well. So if you want these slides for whatever reason or reference or otherwise, it is also out there as well. So with that, I think I will tell everyone thank you for coming. Thank you for braving the snow, and go forth, use .NET. Merry Geek Christmas.
Thanks, Kevin.